Side on, side off. So as we all know, Breath of the Wild is a different kind of Zelda game, and that's in large part because of its focus on the overworld instead of dungeons. I honestly don't even think it's fair to equate Divine Beast to dungeons, rather just call them plot-heavy physics puzzles instead. That rolls right off the tongue. Anyways, I'm already tangenting, that's a good sign. Breath of the Wild is just built different. Look, I even made a nifty little chart like the 3D Mario one. It's still a Zelda game, and if you really want to go down that rabbit hole, check out my other video on that very topic. That being said, I don't want to discount the contrasting experiences between the two types of games. I think they're both neat, and that's worth having a discussion about. So that's what we're getting into today. The late game has the most jarring differences between formula games and exploration games. We'll start by comparing the early and mid-game experiences before we look at that nebulous end game. And then maybe as a bonus, we'll take everything we talked about today and do some speculation on Breath of the Wilder. Okay, leave a like and a subscribe and tell me how bad my Zelda opinions are down in the comments below. Let's go! Depending on the formula game, your starting equipment will vary, but generally speaking, you've got a sword, 3 hearts, and a simple doodad like a shield or a lantern. Your arsenal is pretty limited, but it's enough to start making an impact on the world around you. By mid-game, you've started to amass a decent bag of goodies. It's opened your traversal options quite a bit, and you're better at doing murder, and generally speaking, as you enter dungeons, you'll be encountering obstacles that you can't overcome. And if you're aware of the formula, you can make a safe assumption that you're going to get an item that you need to clear those obstacles within the dungeon. These very clear checkpoints are rewarding to reach even if you see them coming from a mile away. Between heart containers and the ever-expanding arsenal, you can feel your character's growth. Breath of the Wild, on the other hand, doesn't really have that same sense of character growth. You have the bulk of your necessary items and abilities by the time you leave the Great Plateau, so points of character progression aren't really as clear. They definitely exist, but item slots, heart containers, armor, and stamina just don't hold the same measurable shift in progress as no hookshot? Yes, hookshot. Everything is subtle, simply improving on your existing abilities. Even the ghost juice you get from rescuing the divine beasts are just extensions of things you can already do. So instead of character progression, you experience your development through your exploration, which at first feels not very special. Obviously that's the case. You can experience that progression in any game that has you doing even the slightest amount of exploration. But the difference is in how they relate your development to the open design of the world. Feasibly, you could go anywhere in Hyrule once you've cleared the tutorial. Some places might be a bit more treacherous with starting gear, but you can pull it off. All you need is your wits and your mastery of the game. And that's where the progression in Breath of the Wild lies. Proving your might and taking back the land from Conkeldurr. Whether you're fighting the moblin camps, or 100%ing the shrines, or climbing the towers so you can gain access to more of the map, it's all predicated on your ever-growing mastery of the game's systems. New areas aren't unlocked because of plot, they open up because you've proven you're good enough to get there. To manage this at such a large scale, the developers use the horizon to tease big mysteries, often in the form of a massive landmark, and fill the space in between with a variety of different discovery experiences, all of which is giving you the opportunity to master the mechanics. Kinda similar to what I described in my Ape Escape video, only on a much larger scale. Watch that. There's a really cool GDC talk about how they developed this process in Breath of the Wild. I highly recommend checking it out. It's a fundamentally different approach to get the player to the ultimate goal of defeating Gargulgru. But all the same, its intent is to drive players to get better at the game. In contrast to formula games, it's all about following your bliss, and your relationship with the world changes not because of a cool doodad, but because you the player have a better understanding of the mechanics. The approaches are different, but they both are designed to make you, the player, feel more powerful. Again, I wouldn't say one method is better than the other. However, as we reach the end of the game, the similarities between the experience start to diverge, and they become less comparable. Let's jump back to formula games again. Upon reaching the late game, there's normally a narrative turning point that signals we are in the end game. It adds a decent amount of tension, but you've been amassing and upgrading an arsenal of tools, so you're pretty much cruising. You've seen most of the enemy types, and with a good chop-pop-pop, they poof away. And if you've done some experimentation, you might know what some enemies are weak to specifically. This final dungeon might be the biggest yet, but in a lot of ways it feels like a victory lap. On the other hand, Breath of the Wild doesn't have that same feeling of finality to it. There's no definitive line between the second and third acts in Breath of the Wild. From a narrative standpoint, we don't get anything that shifts the status quo and forces us to fight Grindelwald. Zelda has been captured for 100 years, and we've known that since we left the Great Plateau. The rest of the world doesn't really do much to help the third act situation either. There are 4 major components of the overworld: the Megazords, the big tree with the sword, the memories to reclaim, and shrines and side missions that all contextualize the world post-Calamity. It's all there to provide a sense of taking back the land from Gongoldorg, and like we discussed, there's all these check marks that let us know that we're getting stronger and that we're making progress, but it never feels like we're approaching the finale of the game. Even if you do everything, your mentality isn't likely going to be, yes, I've completed all the shrines, picked up all the poop, now it's time to show Conkeldurr what for, because very likely you were ready to take on the final boss well before 100% of the game. And therein lies my biggest gripe with Breath of the Wild. The finale never feels necessary. We can't have a narrative push telling you, okay gamer, time to save the world, now or never, because you fight Yagelgoose when you're ready. A turning point in the plot doesn't work in a game this open, so there needs to be a point where you, the player, feel that you're ready. And the game doesn't do a good job bringing you to that point. Missions, shrines, and Korok seeds exist to make the world feel full, and in the early stages of playing the game, I think it succeeds in doing that. But once you've reached some level of mastery in the systems, the game doesn't hit any crescendo where you feel, yeah, I have taken back the land from Ganon just like Isaac was saying. And a big part of that problem is the enemies become damage sponges, just huge spongy pains in my ass. The worst part is it runs counterintuitive to the premise set up in the early and mid game. They all become so tanky that you never feel like you're just swatting enemies like flies. They soak up so much of your weapon's durability that it feels like it's not worth your time and resources to fight them. And if you're avoiding fights with that mentality, that area becomes theirs again. Plus, if you do decide to fight these moblins, you're gonna use your weaker weapons because why would you bust out the good silverware on these fools and not save them for Ganondorf? It's all so reductive to the feeling of taking back the land that the entire game is predicated on. And sure, technically you can be like this person doing wild ass anime combos, but most people don't get to that point. And so the elements of late game typically end up feeling more like a burden rather than a victory lap. To be fair though, when I'm making my complaints, I'm mostly referring to the combat here. Being able to yeet yourself up a mountainside and overcoming your stamina limitations still feels really good. Unfortunately, like I said, combat doesn't have that same feel-good sense of mastery. And that's a biggie because giving enemies a good whack is a pretty big part of the series. I might do a deeper dive into the combat of Breath of the Wild eventually, but not today. That's a whole other mess, and we're just focusing on the late game experience today. Now, obviously nothing can be done to fix these issues that I have with Breath of the Wild, but what about a potential solution for Breath of the Wild 2? How can we keep the late game feeling just as purposeful and as exciting as it was at the start? If they want this game to remain as open and focused on the overworld as its predecessor, we can't have a narrative driving force like we do in the Formula games. So that's why I propose we do a Metroid on Link. A common trope in Metroid games is starting out incredibly powerful and then zoop, some plot element yoinks it away and now you gotta spend the rest of the game getting back to your original power level, or maybe even surpassing it. And I don't think making this speculation is too far-fetched. With this being one of the few direct sequels in the Zelda series, the groundwork is there. You've proven strong enough to defeat George Geef in Breath of the Wild 1, but because of some latent power, Higgledy Piggledy comes back with a vengeance at the beginning, and the game is once again about traveling through Hyrule to get strong enough to defeat Kankersaur. Only this time, there is an established upper echelon of Link's power that you can strive for. Functionally, the gameplay growth would still be the same, but the context better frames your purpose, and with that framework of a hard reset on Link, it opens up the possibilities for more traditional elements of Zelda. With Link trading in his Wii U gamepad for the Nintendo Power Glove, the developers could still give us the basic toolkit like in Breath of the Wild 1, but this time allow us to unlock more doodads as we go. Maybe stick a hook shot in your arm. Don't make it a required item, and instead give us a new weird way to interact with the world. Again, leaning into the idea of taking back the land. And as for the combat, sticking with more humanoid enemies is kind of expected, especially if they keep weapon degradation in, something I'm totally cool with by the way. But regardless of what they do with combat intricacies and enemy variety, there needs to be some metric within the combat that allows you to feel like a badass. So what I'm asking for is to take out the damage sponge enemies. They aren't more difficult, they're just more of a burden. Beefier enemies don't need to go away entirely, but I want there to be more enemies that I can brainlessly one-shot in a pure power fantasy. It might make some of the game feel a little easier, but it's also worth acknowledging that leaving these weaker enemies in the game has value. Anyways, that's my general gripes with the endgame of Breath of the Wild, and even some potential solutions. A lack of purpose feels almost natural in an open world, but generally I feel that's a good thing because it enables players to actually play. However, if this series is promising us a narrative, they need to keep that energy going even in the end. But whatever, more so than being critical, I'm very much looking forward to seeing what adjustments Nintendo decides to make on this open world experience. If you have opinions on Breath of the Wild, let me know in the comments. I love hearing what people think about this game because each playthrough is so unique. And while you're at it, leave a like, a subscribe, and if you're feeling extra saucy, share with a friend. Tell them, hey, Isaac made a halfway decent point about Zelda and you definitely like it and or hate it. Thanks for watching and have a good day. Oh, whoa, thanks for watching the video. Zelda is most definitely a game. And check it out on screen right now. There's a Patreon. This could be you. Nothing going on this month of August 2021, but next month, September 2021, and then hopefully going forward into the indefinite future, you could be one of these people in the credits. You know, you too could be Crocker Meyer or Meyer Crocker. Or heck, you could be Fake Name 3. Don't you want to be Fake Name 3? I'll have more information about the details of the Patreon and all the little goodies that come along with it coming out soon, so stick around for that. If you're willing and able, obviously. Okay, that's all from me. Have a good.